Faltan dos güeyes, ¿no?
Two.
Faltan dos güeyes que suben.
Alright, this is the final panel of the conference. We've made it to the end of the end of the road. I'm glad you're all still here. I'm hoping you've got some energy for it. It's a real interesting panel, and it's discussing what I've finally found in this space. And it's called Beyond Bitcoin because, well, Bitcoin is, I want to caveat this whole thing because most Bitcoiners have had to deal with the last 10 years onslaught of shitcoin after shitcoin, blockchain this, tokenize that, everything, and it's always been scam after scam after scam. And it basically turned me off to the idea that we can really do anything in this realm that is more than just have a decentralized currency that affords us what Bitcoin affords us. Bitcoin's incredible, of course, but there are other applications too, and I've recently had the hope reignited in me that we can actually move outside of the realm of money and look into the other areas in the digital realm. So, for example, social networking. We're all absolutely sick of Facebook. We're absolutely sick of Twitter. Everyone is using these platforms to complain about the platforms all the time. And when people get sick of it, what they tend to do is they don't abandon what I'm calling the hosted model, which is someone else is handling all your data for you. They don't abandon that model, they just abandon one particular instance of it. So they go from Facebook, and at the moment conservative ideology is basically what's squashed or subjugated on these platforms, and wokeism is what's allowed. So if people get fed up with Twitter and Facebook, they move straight over to something like Gab or Parler or something like that that's sympathetic to their ideology, but it's still got the same problem, which is it's a hosted platform. You can be kicked off it if they don't like what you're talking about. So that's social networking, but then you have things just like chat as well, which is people get fed up with threats from WhatsApp saying we're going to disable end-to-end encryption, or we're going to work with intelligence agencies to get an unhackable backdoor algorithm to our encryption that only the good guys can view your communication, but the bad guys can't, right? We're sick of all that stuff. So around the time that Trump lost the 2020 election, quote marks around that, by the way, around that time, we saw about 1 billion people, I think it was 100 million people, get sick of big data and move from those platforms to Signal and Telegram. And Signal broke for a whole week, I think, just because of how many new people were signing up. And while they were doing the thing I'm decrying here, which is still relying on a third party using a hosted platform, it at least gave me motivation and hope that people actually want to do this. They want to escape these platforms that are abusive by design. Because at the end of the day, if Signal decides to do something else, you don't have any control over that. And you don't even really know what source code is running on the Signal service. And by all accounts, it could just be a honeypot, right? If you want to use secure encrypted messaging, and you go to the best apps out there, they might be the worst place for you to do that, and maybe you'd just be better off doing it in plain sight. And that's not a nice trade-off to have to consider. So anyway, there are other apps, is my point. Bitcoin comes along and it says, we no longer need to depend on banks, we no longer need to ask politicians not to be reckless with the money printing, or to keep interest rates so low that money is literally worthless. We no longer need to depend on that because we're self-sovereign financially. Bitcoin is financial self-sovereignty, but there are other applications for this too. And what I really want to find out from this panel, and I don't really have an opinion on it myself, what the situation I'm in right now is, in 2011 I thought Bitcoin was the answer and it was going to be fantastic, hopefully, but I didn't really know if it was going to work out, if it was really feasible. We still had no idea what we were doing about scaling, all of this stuff, but I hoped it would work. Now, I think most people here would agree Bitcoin worked. There are some people that haven't figured that out yet, but in my opinion, the US dollar is a chicken with his head cut off. It looks alive if you don't really know what you're talking about, but it's dead. And Bitcoin is alive, and it will take the world a while to sort of figure that out and adapt. But Bitcoin is its own animal. It incentivizes adoption. It makes you wealthy if you adopt it. Getting self-sovereign in the other realms, like social media, being motivated to set up your own Mastodon instance, host your own matrix server, all of these things to get free of big data platforms. You're not financially rewarded for it, but there are other benefits. So I work for Start9. They make Embassy OS, which is reminiscent of all of the other node projects in Bitcoin that come on Raspberry Pis, where things like Umbrel, Raspberry Blitz, MyNode, all of these, Cypher Node, all of these projects designed to make it possible and easy for people to run Bitcoin nodes and Lightning nodes and various related apps like BTC Pay Server right out of the box. They all tend to exist in a sort of, in my opinion, unhappy middle ground between it's designed for people that aren't technically capable of doing that from scratch themselves in the first place, but they don't work well enough to the point where they're just plug and play reliable, and the problems they have mean that everyone just spends all their day in Telegram support channels going, why isn't my Lightning payment going, why is X, Y, Z happening? So Embassy is sort of a cut above all of them in that it's got about 10 times more code in it, and that's not in and of itself indicative of higher quality, but they're very, very reliable, and they make it feasible, and this is my main argument, is that people would do what people would get liberation and people would emancipate themselves through technological means if the tools are available and simple enough to use. And that's my point. People are Bitcoiners if Bitcoin exists. People are shitcoiners or fiat standard if that's all they have. So this tool now exists, people can use it, obviously I will advocate for it, but my question really is to the panel, do you think it's realistic that we can transition like we have when it comes to finance? Do you think we can transition with other platforms like social media platforms, chat, file storage, cloud servers no longer depending on iCloud or Google Drive, all of these things? Do you think it's realistic for us to transition away from the current model of client server or master slave as it's known? Go ahead.
I'll take a stab at this question. So let's go back to sort of like first principles. I've said this like a million times, so you guys are very familiar with that. All right. So why is the internet sort of the way it is? Because right now everything is kind of free, but you're being sold to corporations. What happened? Well, the internet suffers from sort of a version of the freeloader problem. Everyone wants everything for free, and that's sort of the price that everyone is used to paying because they haven't had to pay. And the only way in which people have figured out to monetize that is to serve you ads or to put a paywall, but no one uses paywall. How many people? Anyone in here use a paywall? No, nobody uses a paywall. No, it's because everyone wants to be a freeloader. And this is sort of at the heart of why socialism doesn't work, because when you have everyone that's responsible for everything, no one is responsible for anything. And that's sort of the situation we have on the internet. But there's a few companies that figured out how to monetize all of these users by serving them up lots of ads. So Google and Facebook and Twitter mostly run on that ad model, and it's kind of a horrible situation. So right now what we have is sort of like a socialist internet, right? Like where you have Facebook deciding for you what you can and cannot see, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. It is the way it is because of this freeloader. The thing that Bitcoin adds is this ability to pay a little bit. And that changes everything because it's no longer a freeloader. And this is why I'm really excited about the possibilities of something like a decentralized web built on Lightning. So, a way to think about the freeloader problem, and bear with me, this is an analogy I made about 3 minutes ago, is you like going to parties, and that's fine, but there's only no one else likes to host parties, so you just go to the one party that's being held, and that happens to be held by Facebook, and they're taking using your presence there to somehow make money. And the same is going for Google or whatever. What you need are more people willing to host parties. Right? And from sort of like an internet perspective, what you have are these giant servers, Facebook, Google, Twitter, whatever, and that's it. Those are controlled by some central entity, and they become the middleman to everything. in order to get like the decentralized web that we really want, where there is no middleman, there is no single point of failure, and we have maximum liberty, what we need is a lot more people willing to host, right? Like if you had lots of people willing to host, then you actually start getting something. The problem has been, there's no way to really get paid that easily for being willing to host. And that's been the freeloader problem from the beginning of the internet. But now that we have Lightning, you have a way to pay somebody a small amount for running that service. And this is, I think, the direction that companies like Start9 and Audible will go towards, is that you provide a service, and not just to others, but for yourself. So you might not just be running a Bitcoin node, but also a Lightning node, or a video server node, or a social app node, or there's like Stacker News node, right? Like that's something you can host, it's open source and so on. This is how you get a decentralized web. If you have only clients and very few servers, that's a centralized web. If you have lots of servers and lots of clients, that's a decentralized web. This is why Bitcoin is decentralized, because lots of people are running their own nodes and serving up data to other people. You have lots of people in Bitcoin. We have a culture of essentially people that are willing to host parties. But on the internet, that's not the case. We have a bunch of freeloaders, and there's even like regulation probably coming that's going to try to limit that. But with Lightning, you have this ability to charge a tiny bit of money and make it profitable instead of everyone freeloading off of you and then you having to pay the bandwidth costs and everything else. Instead, you can, make that work. And you can host videos, you can host social media, you can host tweets, blogs, whatever. And that's when you get a real decentralized one. Now, when's that gonna come? It's another discussion. But this is what gets me excited about Lightning, is because it's instilling a culture where there's a lot of people running their own nodes. They're willing to host their own parties. They're willing to, do some of the work instead of just freeloading off of everybody else's work and end up getting exploited as a result of it. It incentivizes people to be productive, to serve up, to host parties.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what we want to see, to summarize, I wasn't looking at it so much in terms of centralization and decentralization. I was looking at it more in terms of, because what you're doing with your own personal server in this regard is just between you and your server. It's not necessarily, like Bitcoin's decentralized because it's a network, but if you're just hosting your own cloud storage, it's not decentralized exactly, it's just you have your server. And to me this was the forgotten counterpart to the personal computer movement, which is the personal server movement, which is as you move to the client server model and everything you do on a phone or a laptop or anything is just, everything is always happening away from you. You can keep that model, but you need to be the one running the server, so it's still a master-slave model, but you are your own master, so to speak, so you won't kick yourself off your own platform. Lightning, what you're talking about there is interesting too. Obviously, these things like Umbrella and Start9 come with Sphinx Chat and the few apps that now exist sitting on top of Lightning. As far as I know, they are horrendously buggy still. And
all of them are. And I read about one today that they made from like the Impervious AI hackathon. You can do phone calls over Lightning. So you can call a node and voice chat with somebody, and it's peer to peer. The NSA literally can't track it because it's all encrypted, and there's no middle person, right? Like this is the decentralized web that we all want. And it's the one that was promised to us with the internet, but we never got.
And he literally hacked that together in a couple of hours. And a few of the benefits of that is that because what you're essentially doing with Bitcoin and Lightning in particular is you're giving everybody an encrypted, like a public and private key that you can then use for authentication. You can use for securing communication. You can use for proving history of receipt, a payment, anything like that. And putting a PGP key in everybody's hands is a huge deal because that's been a huge part of the problem with the security on the internet is that we're pushing it off to the host. they're going to store all our usernames and passwords, which just becomes a giant vulnerability. But then like something like that, where you're doing a phone call by establishing a connection over Lightning, you're provably encrypted, and you also can't be man in the middle. Like you know the public key of who you're talking to, so you know you've connected to them. There's no SIM swap, there's no anything else. Like you just, if they try to SIM swap your phone or whatever, they just have encrypted garbage. So like there's a huge opportunity here to start like touching on these things, and I think the ability to pay, so much of the limitations have been in the fact that you cannot monetize. And I think that's where the real innovation is going to come, is in new monetization models and figuring out how to limit to the consumer, limit the mental cost, like so that it's not a paywall in front of everything. Because Nick Zava talks about that as the consumer cost of micropayments or whatever. That just having to decide whether or not this is worth a penny is probably worth more than a penny. It's like it's 3 cents of my time to decide whether or not to pay 1 cent to read this article.
There's another issue as well with it, which is people are still incentivized the way they're incentivized, not just in that way, but also if you have something like a decentralized YouTube where you pay for stuff, and if you upload content you get money for it, there's nothing really to stop people just downloading it once and uploading it to a centralized platform, and everyone paying for viewing it on the centralized platform in a way they don't understand, i.e. with all their personal data and privacy and all that stuff. Because again, it might just be slightly easier, or they might not have to think about spending a penny. So like I worry about, that's part of the reason I want to know whether this, if in 10, 20 years, unlike hyper-Bitcoinization, do we really see everyone running their own social network? Do we really see everyone hosting Mastodon and all that stuff?
I don't see everyone doing it, but I see enough people doing it that it's meaningless to attempt to centralize it. That it will become easy enough, but particularly with the increase in fiber and particularly high upload internet access, and kind of the ubiquity of mobile phones. Like everyone is always connected now, and that's increasingly true over the whole world. Like even the people who are just getting to the internet are doing so over cellular and over mobile. So everybody is used to being connected all the time. And that's exactly where people talk about like the problems Lightning is you have to be online. It's like, okay, I have like 5 different ways that I'm online right now, what else works when you're not online? Whose debit card works when nobody's got internet connection? It doesn't work. Nothing works when it's not online. Everything depends on the damn internet these days. I really kind of think one of the biggest problems we have, which is kind of cool that it works like with the embassy and the Uproll, is that they lean on Tor for this, but port forwarding is one of the biggest headaches for anybody who's trying to host something at home. It's the biggest headache for me. I know how to do it. Like I'm a network technician. It's still a pain in the ass to get like a server at home to work. And I'm like, it's like trying to actually set that stuff up. It's just really frustrating and annoying. But I think there's just, because there's been no market for it, there's been no push to simplify and really make the user experience seamless for that. But I just logged into my embassy and updated my L&D to look at my Sphinx or whatever. And the Tor, usually the problem with Tor, even though it gets around the port forwarding, is that there's a delay. This is almost like a few seconds to do just about anything because it has to run over Tor. But it's actually pretty damn responsive this time. So, but again, it's typically a delay from like what I can get out of it. It's a delay that's worth it, and it's still really handy. But yeah.
Getting back to your question about realism, so this is very cool. This is also what we would like to see. Bitcoin helping fixing the internet. Bitcoin, which is completing the internet and fixing the shortcomings of the existing internet. What is what are the odds that we're going to see something like that really built and functioning and ready for mass consumption? I think that we will see it happen in degrees, in phases. And the first phases will be less interesting probably than these. And these will be the last phases, the most interesting, but also they're harder to build at scale. So the first one that you can think about is very, very simple. You were talking about partner and gap, so centralized alternatives to Twitter. Well, one of the problems they have is that they run up some AWS server, and the AWS Amazon will just shut them down because they are not aligned with the prevalent political sentiment. So Bitcoin can already, if not fix, mitigate this. Bitcoin can make it easy, can lower the barrier for motivated people to build centralized services. So before we go to decentralized social networks, probably we will see Bitcoin already making lower the barrier to build your own alternative social network with some kind of bridging. Think about Mastodon. Mastodon works. There is not much incentive to migrate, even if we tried many times, many ways to migrate. The network effects from Twitter are keeping us on Twitter. But if the maintainer of a Mastodon instance can actually get paid in Satoshi to do that, even if it's not a decentralized mechanism, even if it's just Novak asking for sats in order to maintain the Bitcoin hackers instance, that's already something that we can expect in the short term. Then the second step would be to basically really use Bitcoin only as an incentive for people to store private keys. This is what Guy was also mentioning before. So stuff like PGP already works. Theoretically, PGP works. Everybody can use it. But the point is that nobody wants to maintain a private key. Nobody even knows what it is, a private key or a public key. They just lose it. They just leave it around, get it stolen. So before Bitcoin, getting private keys in the hands of users were unbelievably difficult for an incentive reason. One example is, for example, the debate between Telegram and WhatsApp about end-to-end encryption. So Telegram, Duro, he was explaining, I'm doing end-to-end only in private chats, but not default, because if I do it as default, then people will just have to keep the keys, and if not, they will have to update their keys using their telephone number. But telephone number can be easily swapped, so there's fake security. So there's all this discussion about what do you do when you lose your cell phone with your private keys. Either you store it and you don't because you don't know what it is. With Bitcoin, everybody, for independent reason, for a stronger incentive, which is money, they are or they will have to learn how to store private keys. So such new kind of PGP-like architectures and protocols, they can leverage the fact that in 2009, nobody except a few nerds knew how to store a private key. And in 2039, probably everybody, in order to survive in a hyper-Bitcoinized world, they will have to know what a private key is, what a seed phrase is, etc., etc. So this may help actually public key infrastructure like Keybase and something like that to proliferate and prosper and maybe bridge many services. And then the last part is actually what Jim was talking about, and also Guy later on, which is using the payment inside Lightning to incentivize a new kind of internet, which would be very cool, because if you think about that, right now we have this kind of internet infrastructure, on top of which we build Bitcoin, on top of which we build Lightning, on top of which we may build another internet infrastructure closing the circle. So we may have like a Bitcoin core node, which is using for its networking level, not the normal TCP connection, but actually this kind of onion routed payload on Lightning, which is using a Bitcoin core node in order to get settled. So we will close the circle, but this is, I mean, there are a lot of challenges before this, mainly because while Bitcoin is ready, Lightning itself is still very, very early. Like we tried to build something like that with a protocol called Storm, and we realized that there is no Lightning implementation which is very easy to customize, very flexible, and also very stable. When you build something on Lightning today, Lightning will change under your feet. It's still not very stable. So, but we have like Sphinx, Chat, WhatsApp. We have experiments, and I guess that maybe 10 to 15 years we may see something ready for mass consumption.
Right. Yeah, just a reflection on that. I sort of agree with all the previous speakers. But imagine how much easier this would have been if the HFSP, the hash final settlement protocol, is slash BTC had been invented before TCP/IP, for instance, and the internet had been built upon this from the beginning. But it weren't. We are in the situation we are, and like now we have this technology, so I believe it will happen. But as you say, slowly, it's going to take a while to rethink everything.
Yeah, it's important to point out that the current... Hello? Okay. It's important to point out that the current...
Micrófono de sombra está feo.
There's another one. So it's important to point out that the current internet has been completely optimized for the current internet, right? Like, you have servers and everyone's a client. It's very difficult to do port forwarding, for example, because no one actually runs a server at home. I bet you all of you have internet at home, but not nearly as many of you run a server at home. And this is because, that's not what the internet is set up for. So infrastructure will have to change, and I think, the nodes that are coming out of these companies is just step one. And but the ISPs are going to have to change, and they're not, they're going to have probably like different packages, one for people that are freeloaders, right, just clients or whatever. But for others that might actually want to host something and have static IPs, to some degree they already have it. But you're going to have plug-and-play devices, and ISPs are going to start offering these things where it's going to be like, okay, well, you also want to serve stuff. Okay, well, we'll have enough of an uplink. Like it's atrocious that download speeds are like insanely fast, but upload speeds are insanely slow.
Yeah.
It's made so that you don't run a server at home. But once you get more of that demand going, then some of this stuff starts changing, because a lot of these are bidirectionally, like kind of, it doesn't matter. Like it's same speed either direction. Similarly, a lot of the software is going to change, and it's going to be a lot more consumer friendly. It's going to take some time. It took a while before the internet was usable, right? Like it was, like I still remember like logging in and going to Gopher servers and stuff like that. There's lots of iteration that's required before it's intuitive for people, and this is something that a lot of people have trouble understanding. But that's going to happen, and we're going to see apps on top of stuff like Lightning, on where you're serving peer-to-peer. And the evolution, I think, will be kind of like file sharing. It started as a very centralized thing with Napster. What changed the game was not that BitTorrent was so new or something like that, or it was so popular. It's that it made every node into a server, because you had automatic upload as part of the protocol. So when you make people sort of like host a party every five parties or something like that, then yeah, you're going to have a lot more parties, and they're going to be higher quality and stuff like that. So I think that's the direction we have to go in, and I can see a decentralized Twitter, I can see a decentralized YouTube, I can see a decentralized Facebook. But Bitcoiners are probably going to be the first ones to use it. Possibly the people that are getting kicked off of all the other platforms, they're probably going to come in and do this, because this is literally uncensorable, right? Like if you host a Lightning node, as long as people are willing to open a channel to you, you're going to be connected to the network. And then people can go get your content whenever they want. And I think that's a future. I don't know, maybe I'm a little more optimistic than Giacomo. I think within 5 to 10 years we'll see something decently usable for technical people, and then like another 5 years after that we'll see something like that consumers will be able to use. And they'll get a box for their house, and it'll have all sorts of features so that people can fix it remotely and things. But yeah, I see this as actually happening instead of the crazy crap that we have right now, which is all centralized.
Yeah, one thing that I view differently to most of what you said, all of you guys, is I never really thought about it in terms of centralization and decentralization, because I'm not interested in replacing my Google Drive or my iCloud with some sort of decentralized cloud storage, because that to me reeks of shitcoinery. And like the way, maybe with Lightning it becomes something worth looking at again, but I was just seeing it in terms of I have a server at home. I mean, this is centralized to me. It's just me. It's my server. All my data goes there. My whole family can use it, in fact. It's got a whole bunch of music on it, photos, whatever. We all have the relevant app on our phone and laptop. We can access it and use it. So I don't know if it's correct to consider that decentralized. If you're talking about networks like Mastodon, whatever it's sorry?
I think it is. I think that is decentralized. Like self-hosting is decentralizing the hosting. You know, it's I'm not relying on some central platform. Like when you and I are talking, we're not going to Google and then back. You talk to my server. So I think self-hosting is decentralizing the hosting problem.
And they already have those like products, right? Like you can buy like those external hard drives that plug straight into your router, and it has like an interface to go do that because you're serving up data to yourself. But you know, you don't have to serve it only to yourself. I'd like to share my photos with my family. I'm using Google Photos right now. But I would love to have my own photo server that Google has no idea about. I keep my privacy and I give out access to the, you know, that correspond to the private keys of my friends and family, and that's it. Like that would be amazing, but that doesn't exist right now.
So I'm saying the technology is basically there now. It's maybe a little clunky with embassy, but the point is the desire, like, because we need the desire and we need the tech for us to transition into a world where people aren't all just slaves to Google and Facebook. And I'm asking, is the desire there? Will people actually do this? Even without, let's say without the financial incentivization of lightning sats, getting sats for it. Let's say you're doing this for yourself, so you literally be paying sats to yourself. So we're not talking about financial incentive here. We're talking about people literally just hosting their own services. Do you think it's realistic?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to
Good. That's the end.
I don't want to get too much philosophical, but trying to take it from first principles. If you think about that, you always have a trade-off between a centralized efficiency and decentralized anti-fragility. So a centralized service, a specialized service where there is one guy doing one job for everybody else, is very, very efficient because he's very specialized. But it's very fragile because he can easily censor everybody else. So on one end of on the spectrum, you have everybody running their own server, but they have to be skilled enough to do port forwarding. It's true that if many people does it, somebody will come along to give them easier tool to do it. But still, do you really want to be? You have your family pictures on your personal cloud, but then your house catch fires, and then you don't have them anymore. With Google Drive, you have the advantage that you're not responsible. A little bit like with COVID discussion, you don't want always full responsibility. Delegation is good. Too much delegation means you become a zombie that cannot care for yourself. But too few delegation means that you are forced to actually take care of your stuff alone, and you have full responsibility, which is scary. So I think that the difference between your home cloud and a decentralized, incentivized cloud system is that with your own cloud, if you go offline, you are just offline. With Google, you're always online, but you are at the mercy of somebody else controlling your life. With a decentralized storage system with incentives, you are just paying other nodes to keep your chunks of your encrypted files, and you pay them to retrieve them. So maybe you are just you don't want to spend money, so you run your own server, so you pay yourself, so you don't pay anybody, and you just have your own node. But then if you go offline, you can still pay other people, you can seamlessly fall back on other people. So this is a BitTorrent-like, Bitcoin-like decentralization, which is not just everybody is doing everything for themselves, but everybody is distributing work, but not to some few specialized people, but to everybody else with an incentive mechanism. Is the difference between eCache centralized server run by David Chaum and miners, which are centralized, but there is an incentive mechanism that will provide to create them everywhere you need them. There will always be a miner ready to mine your transaction. There will not be always your own settlement servers at all.
Yeah, I think there's a part of the discussion missing again, and that's why these giants such as Google and Facebook and so on, why they're so big and why there's a monopoly in the first place. is because we lack they're closer to the money spigot because of the cantonal effect. They get the cheaper loans, and therefore there's a sort of a monopoly. You can also see this in the streaming platforms that don't really compete with each other because they all have different content because of copyright rules, right? Copyright laws. So the problem again is that we don't have a money-free market globally. So if we get that competition, that's what we have to fix. Bitcoin fixes even this problem in the long run, at least. I choose to be optimistic, as usual.
Well, the reason I say yes, and the reason I'm very optimistic about it is because, just think about Bitcoin. Like, for 30 years, cypherpunks had the idea that they were going to create a decentralized, independent digital money, and how hard did they beat that idea to death and come up with nothing? And then in 2009, Bitcoin just is posted. And suddenly it's there. And it's because people cared about it. People knew that there was a need for it. And that was a shockingly small group of people that brought that to fruition. The cypherpunk and the cryptography mailing list was not a big population of people. There are more people working today on exactly this problem than ever before. Every single year it grows and it grows and it grows, and all of the alternative centralized ones are just an example of how great the pressure has become to solve this problem. And there are people, I mean, even Jack is talking about, like, has been working on Blue Skies, he announced that like a year ago or a year and a half ago or something. And the idea is to get an independent protocol for social media that anyone can run. So even if there is a Facebook hosting and a Twitter hosting and a Google hosting, when you share on Twitter, your Google friends see it. When you share on Facebook, your Twitter friends see it. Like, it's still a single protocol, and just like TCP/IP, anyone can join and host and participate. But one thing that I think that I think is in a lot of people's minds, but hasn't really been realized in taking advantage of, that doesn't have the port forwarding problem, that doesn't have the speed problem, is just torrent. Like, we have the hosting sorted out. We torrents hosted music and movies at a faster download rate than Netflix did for like a decade if you've got 100 peers.
I still use the Pirate Bay.
You use what?
The Pirate Bay.
Yeah.
Well, also torrent decentralized web too, because there's ZeroNet. With ZeroNet you actually can use torrent to decentralize web pages. Of course it's difficult because you have to prove the authorship on the page in order to change it, and so they use Bitcoin public keys in order to be able to change it. So there is stuff there, yeah.
And I know there's a number of projects basically working on leveraging this. There's one right now that I've been playing with, and they're kind of like their private beta called, it's not live yet, so I hope it's okay that I say something about this. But it's called Shock Wallet, and it's running on Lightning, and it's like Lightning.page. Lightning.page is what they're doing, but essentially it's exactly what you were talking about. Like, I could run my own, but right now I'm just testing around and playing with it as them, the host. But I pay them 1,000 sats for media. Any text or whatever is just free. And I pay them 1,000 sats for any media upload. So I just like uploaded all my like Lord of the Rings GIF like things in my video and like all that stuff. And I pay them 1,000 sats every time just to host it. And then when anybody goes to my page, the media is pulled from their server. And it's actually pretty damn responsive. And I can just share out my Lightning page. It's got like a big hash at the end so that, you know, it's me. And then you can directly pay to my pub key because it's attached to that page. And it's all built on top of Lightning and WebTorrent. So it's like directly into browsing. And he's the guy who's been working on this and their team. They've got like a million different ideas of how to expand this. But right now it's just, let's see if we can get this working. You know, you can host with 4 different people at the same time, 10 different people at the same time if you're like a really popular feed. And even the potential of having people host for free and they can insert their ads. You know, let's say like you're like a really popular, dude on this service. I can host for you for free, and then just put in an ad for my hosting, so other people will pay me for hosting, and I've funded your thing. You know, people still get the free content like they're used to, but the actual funding and the hosting is decentralized enough that it's uncancelable. You know, so I just think there's more people working on it today than there ever have been, and I think the pressure is greater today than it ever has been to solve this problem, and I think it's just a matter of time.
Well, I want to go back to something that Knut said. A lot of these companies are gigantic because there's an incentive there for them to get there that way. Once you're gigantic, you have all sorts of advantages that you don't as a small player. And you know, all of these companies grew in large part due to VC money, you know, hyper growth through you know, insane injections of capital to essentially kick out all their competitors. I think under a Bitcoin standard, that stops happening, right? You have to have organic growth. And that means generally a lot more competition, and that means a lot more variety. So right now, if you imagine the internet, it's like one giant city with like 4, you know, walled gardens basically, where you go in and get stuff. You have your Facebook account, you have your Google account, and you know, you play in the Google place, and it's kind of like Disneyland. It's all make-believe, not real. And everyone is treated exactly the same way, and you know, you have access to the same things. There's no real personalization per se. I think under a Bitcoin standard, well, first of all, these companies stop making quite as much money because, you know, like people aren't going to want, you know, bias reporting or whatever, and you know, things are going to come to a head because they're pressured from the regulatory side and from the advertiser side. Like users are like a distant third in their list of concerns right now as far as whom to satisfy. So the user experience is just going to get worse and worse. But you know, you have an incentive on this decentralized web, where instead of one giant city with 4 walled gardens, I think you're going to have smaller, you know, communities that do what they want to do, and that have software that's more catered towards what they need instead of, you know, like if Facebook or if Twitter changes the number of characters to 288, everyone has to do that, right? Like there are communities that might have wanted a shorter one. There are other communities that might have wanted an even longer one. Maybe there's some shocker that might want an edit button. You know, like there's a lot of different ways in which like it should be sort of market testable. Instead, right now, what we have is something like that's centrally controlled, that is top down. You are going to take this no matter what. In sort of like these, you know, a decentralized web, I think you get something like with smaller delegations of responsibility and not like an Uber delegation of responsibility where everyone keeps their money with the central bank, which is what CBDCs are doing, or everyone keeps their data with Google, which is sad, right? Like you want multiple providers, you want competition, and I suspect that there's a lot of non-innovation that's been going on because of these sort of you know, fiat-fueled monopolies that have essentially cropped up as a result. Like it's crazy to me that Twitter doesn't have an edit, or it's so stupid.
Speaking about incentive, I think there is another reason to be very optimistic about incentives to build this stuff. Of course, there will be incentive for users to use this stuff and for companies to provide storage and such. But there is also a strong incentive for current Bitcoin users and developers to figure out something similar, because Bitcoin is moving more and more off-chain. That means that right now in the on-chain model, you have your seed from at the beginning it was nightmare, because you need to store independently private and public keys for every address, and you need to sync your Bitcoin wallet .dat, and it was madness. Then hierarchical deterministic wallets and BIP32 came along, and everything became very nice, because now you have your seed, and from your seed you will derive everything. But that's not true anymore, because with your seed you cannot derive your Lightning channel state, updated state. You have to store them separately. And with Taproot, even already with P2SH, from your seed you cannot derive your script of your multi-sig. Maybe you can brute force it, but with Taproot you cannot brute force it because the brute forcing space becomes infinite. So with Taproot you need to store your Taproot independently. So now, from your seed, you cannot recover your advanced Bitcoin stuff anymore. That means that you need to store it somewhere. Of course, you can just store it encrypted on your hard drive and be very careful and back it up on a second drive. You can store it on Dropbox encrypted and be very careful and hope that Dropbox are not going to cancel you for some reason. But since you're already using a decentralized protocol which is so neat, where you just need your passphrase and you have everything, how cool would it be to have a decentralized storage protocol where from your passphrase you can recover also a distributed chunks of many other Bitcoin related data about your Taproot script?
This came to mind with what Guy was talking about. I think one of you was talking about a fail-safe here, like if you're self-hosting everything and your house burns down, everything's gone. But of course there can be services that offer, okay, once a week in a way that doesn't compromise your privacy, all your data gets encrypted and uploaded.
Somebody you trust, right? Like the thing about networks is that whoever you're connected to, you're likely going to be like trusting them. If it's your dad or your sister or something like. There's lots of ways in which you can leverage sort of the social network that you already have. That social network isn't really available at that level because no one is hosting parties, right? Like you need more of that in order for that to be an option. If your sister is hosting a node as well now that's a great place to go back up all your photos because in case you die, it's all there instead of having to trust a faceless corporation that might be sharing all that data with the NSA. That network graph, an actual decentralized network graph instead of this super hub and spoke model that we have, is what it solves a lot of problems almost for free.
Oh yeah, it does. And well, my fear ultimately that I'll share with you all is that you can build technology, but you can't make anyone use it. And even if they do use it, they don't necessarily use it in a way that preserves their privacy, which is one of the sad parts of Bitcoin, right? Is that we have to have this mantra, not your keys, not your coins, because people will just come along and use it in the stupidest ways and sadly walk away from all 90% of the benefits of owning Bitcoin in the first place. Like the sheer amount of Bitcoin that GBTC own is a great example of that, because these people aren't self-sovereign financially in any shape or form. I understand the legitimate reason for that to exist, but nonetheless, it's like Saifedean's analogy. It's like taxiing a private jet around on the runway, or using the bed inside there to sleep, but never actually flying. Like you're losing half the benefit. And so yeah, my point is that we need people to actually use it once it's built, and we need them to use it the right way. So we'd expand the mantra, not your keys, not your coins, to not your social network. Well, I don't know what the end part of that would be, but if it's not your social network, you can be deplatformed, you can be censored.
Not your dick pics.
Not your what? Your
Dick pics.
Well, that's not really the social network, that's more the chat platforms than the social media, though I don't have your Facebook account.
It depends on your confidence.
I'm going to not confirm your friend
With
request.
Doctor, that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do, okay? Like, it really, and this is the problem with decentralized services. You have appropriate things for certain people that are inappropriate for others. There's no distinction. It's all just going to some central server.
I thought we were talking about Philip Dick, the science fiction writer, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about Philip Dick.
Philip K. Dick.
There are people that get offended by this fiction, you know. But I mean, that's the idea, is that when you have more granularity in who you share things with, instead of this Uber server that has everyone's data, that's essentially a honeypot for every hacker, you know, it's now like distributed information that's all over. Now, you're probably going to have to outsource some of your security to other people that know a little bit better, and maybe they give you certain guarantees on your server as part of the contract, something like that. But you know, that's a whole lot better than, you know, trusting Amazon to carry all of your data all the time or something to that effect.
Okay, now that I've got all my heroes trapped on a stage and you can't escape, I have the desire and I don't have the tech. What do I do?
Buy an embassy.
Well, do exactly what you're doing now, Ugly. Just spend money on
You're
it.
doing fine.
Well, so you're supposed to pay somebody with that expertise to help you that you trust. So I believe you have a son that's coming up to the mic that took my class. So I think he has the ability.
I've stopped trying to tell him what to do. Because he doesn't listen to anybody. But here's where I have a question for you guys. A big part of social media, Netflix, like TikTok, my kids are in life on TikTok now. It's the AI behind it. This learning what we like, right? As an individual. And it's basically using that as like a Pavlov's dog. It's feeding us, it's rewarding us, based on what they're learning about us. And so if you create these decentralized social media networks or so forth, how, from an AI perspective, how are you going to replicate that experience? And maybe that's, I see you guys are all coming from like Bitcoiner security, mindset, encryption, sovereign individual, but most of the populace that I talk to every day, most of the kids growing up these days, they could care less about that. They want their Snapchat, they want their TikTok, they want that experience, and they just want a user experience where they're interacting with their friends. They could, they kind of understand, they understand a lot better than we did when we were growing up. Don't post those drunk pictures of yourself, kids are real confident. Yeah.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, but this is, again, like some of the problems we've heard in Bitcoin. It's like, if someone comes up and says, look, you've got this Bitcoin thing, it's great. What if with my current debit card, if I lose it, or someone, steals it and buys, $100 worth of stuff and taps for it, how are you going to solve that problem in Bitcoin? And the answer is you actually can't. And Bitcoin isn't going to solve that problem.
Decentralized.
Well, you make it sound like it's a good thing. I
Yeah,
think it's
that's
creepy when TikTok tells me what videos I'm going to like.
Yeah, I also, I would challenge the idea that the artificial intelligence is mostly used to give users the best user experience. That's maybe, but if you think about it, you remember when Twitter was just chronological, everybody was enjoying it, and then they actually changed it in order to show you other stuff, and nobody was very happy about it. So I don't think that's serving.
Yeah, no, the reason they do that is for ads.
Yeah, they're serving. AI is serving the advertiser mostly. I think there are some applications where centralized artificial intelligence serve the user like Alexa. You cannot have a server-side Alexa because you cannot really pack that kind of voice recognition right now into a local service. You need a giant computer connected and remote. But for Twitter or Facebook, the thing that AI does is just to feed us more advertising. So if you change the business model, I don't think you just need it anymore as a user.
Well, I think a big part of what it does is it searches the videos out there and figures out what other people with similar interests like you are interested in, and then they communicate that back. To me, that's kind of decentralizing that is an
Well, and you can, but then it becomes sort of an opt-in thing. I want these, but then in return I have to provide my own data. And then, if it's opt-in, all the power to them, and maybe they even pay you for that opt-in, right? It's like, okay, we would like to know what videos you're interested in as a 16-year-old girl, because we want to serve other 16-year-old girls, and we will pay you, this amount of money over some period of time. And you can do that over Lightning, and every time you get the data, maybe it's authenticated in some way. Then like with some cookies or something. Then you could probably do it. But they're getting all of that data for free right now by centrally hosting it. It's your data. You should at least have the option.
You guys are the ones that use Twitter and Facebook, and I don't even use this stuff. So you guys, I think you guys are the ones addicted to it, and you're trying to solve the problem to it. And I could care less, but I'm looking at it from where like my kids are using this stuff, and I get why it's addictive. I understand that.
I think that's.
And I really do believe that it is the algorithms that are feeding us that information that we want more and more, and we're fearing that we're missing out on the information that people in the Bitcoin community are sharing, or people in the crypto space, or the Bitcoiners, or the COVID people, or the Christians, or whatever groups you're part of. It is connected, and it's how many recommendations notifications you get on Twitter to say, join the, follow this person, this or that. That's not out of the blue. It's because there's an algorithm there telling you that, hey, that you're going to be interested in this as well.
I think the algorithm is literally just designed to keep you there. Like, it's the algorithm is to condition you to always catch that next notification, to always put something that's triggering and that you're going to get mad about and you have to engage in, because if you're pissed, if you're upset, and somebody somewhere in the world is stupid and you have to correct them, then you can't get off Twitter. And I think that AI is not for our benefit, it's for their benefit. It's to keep us on the platform. But I think there is, which I mean, most of these AI, most of the algorithms are really simple learning algorithms. And you can easily self-host them if there's a legitimate value to having that. Like if we end up in a situation where we're self-hosting and we have a social media thing, well, if the experience is better because I downloaded a little, program that just learned what I like to click on, and then it better sorted my feed of the 2,000 people I'm following based on what I'm intending to like, and that made my experience better. I enjoyed it more. It's like, okay. And maybe that could be a charge for service like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Plus, it can be done with some homomorphic encryption in which the artificial intelligence aggregates something without seeing single things. I mean, there are ways to do that that are not predatory. You just need the incentives to do that.
Yeah, I'd like to answer the question from a slightly more philosophical angle by quoting one of my favorite authors, Terry Pratchett, who wrote the Discworld novels. Are you familiar with them? He said that real stupidity beats artificial intelligence every time. And this is what Bitcoin is. Because if we're afraid of some AI apocalypse and like the robot overlords taking over our minds, starting with the social networks and going on to becoming, Skynet, cyber systems, whatever. The only tool we have to fight that with is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is decentralized intelligence. It's like the sum of all of our brains is larger than the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? Like the intelligence of the free market is like the ultimate form of resistance from humanity against the robot overlords.
And I think the incentives in Bitcoin particularly are just stronger than in any other industry, in any other, culture probably. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is something, even people up here, we may never, 10 years ago, maybe none of us really thought about that or even care. But this is a topic at every single Bitcoin conference. And every single year, Bitcoin is more influential. There are more Bitcoiners. It's bigger and it's more important in the global sphere. I think those are going to go hand in hand. And I think the social media problem and the decentralized hosting problem, as big as the scope of the abuse of it is today, with the social media giants and the censorship, I think the problem is a whole hell of a lot easier than the Bitcoin problem. If Bitcoin exists and it works, then I have no doubt in my mind that the decentralized, the self-hosting and the decentralized social media or whatever is going to be fixable. It's a solvable problem.
What about the other functions, or the other services, like file storage? Because the social media is necessarily kind of public anyway, but
I think the incentives are the same.
Yeah.
I think the incentives are the same.
Okay.
Maybe it's actually, I would say that social media is harder than just storage. Storage just means you put your stuff and pay somebody to take it and to give it back. Social media also means discovery and public identity, which is a little bit more challenging. So, but I agree with Guy. We can do both. Another incentives to do both. We just have to not be shitcoiners in the sense that we just have to be realistic. So we cannot wish somebody into existence. We have to actually try and make mistakes and destroy mistakes and call out stuff that cannot work, and do not use tokens. No tokens. If some project has a token,
We've all been traumatized by everybody saying that they're going to make a decentralized X, except no one wants to run the poll, right? Like that's it's like no one wants to host a party. We're going to have this system where everyone's going to host a party except no one wants to host a party. It doesn't make any sense. So we've all been traumatized by that, unfortunately, and that's where we are now.
And I don't see, particularly in the context of like, yeah, shitcoin isn't going to solve the problem. In fact, more than anything, I think it's going to destroy the economic incentives if you have a floating value token attached to something like that. But, you know, think about it, even with BitTorrent, just because there was something that people wanted that they couldn't get a hold of somewhere else, particularly back before streaming services, when the copyright industry just would not allow digital media to exist, it became the majority of the bandwidth on the internet. Like, the hosting was not the problem on BitTorrent. It was all for free. Everybody was just participating because they wanted the content and they liked the content. And because of that, I don't think the hurdle is the desire. I think it's purely technical, solving those little headaches, those little delays, and those user experience problems.
Let's get one question.
I want to tell you guys about a project that's decentralizing everything.
Let's talk about
Data point.
What is ranking on a coin market cap?
They have a token, they call it SATS. It's really good.
I was going to kick you out.
Everyone's favorite shitcoin.
So, yeah, it's Adam Curry. He's apparently like one of the earliest podcasting sort of
He lives in Austin.
You guys know him?
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, they're building, apparently, according to his telling on Joe Rogan, they're building basically a distributed torrenting kind of infrastructure. There's websites, there's apps, and they're plugging the Lightning Network to it, so you can do stream.
He already
podcasts.
did that with the podcast. So my podcast, you can listen on Breeze, and if you do, you can pay me 10 cents a minute or something.
Yeah, I've already made pretty well just on Sphinx or whatever. I've already made over $500 just for that. I don't even offer anything else. Like, it's just the same podcast with ads. They just do. Everybody just does it as donations essentially.
Yeah, they stopped doing that for me for some reason.
I would love to see Bitcoin podcasts without a 10-minute long spiel about Lenin and every other BlockFi. I don't want to hear about BlockFi again. These guys are the next Mt. Gox. I don't want to hear about BlockFi
And
anymore.
not just podcasts, think about videos, like beautiful BTC session videos. They're beautiful. You just have, in order to make it sustainable, you just have to see 3 minutes of legit sponsorship. It's okay as a model. But it's just a little bit annoying as a user. If you can pay him directly to skip that, that's something everybody would do basically, because the value of the content is very high.
Yeah, I've been actually exporting a ad-free version of my show for like 50 episodes, but actually my biggest problem has been hosting. So right now, the podcasting 2.0 stuff doesn't have hosting, and I can't figure out a good way to host somewhere and then have a RSS feed that I'm hosting. It just has that custom location built into it. It's just a headache. I know it's going to take days to sort it out. But the funny thing is, they actually figured that out over WebTorrent. Like that's been one of the big things. Is that you just punch in an RSS feed, a WebTorrent, like
And then you do a split with the actual server.
like a magnet, and then split with the server. And they're actually BitTorrent user who has a seed box that they've been for free blasting out 100 copyrighted movies. The whole Lord of the Rings collection for years now can actually get paid to host my podcast. And I can offer something to spend for free that I can that nobody else that I can't get more content.
We've pretty much got a wrap up now, so I thought I'd offer a closing thought or two. So hammer home the idea that this mantra of when you meet a Bitcoiner, you're very concerned straight away, which is how are you storing your coins? And you're just sitting there on Binance because you're not a Bitcoiner if that's the case. So this mantra needs to move outside of that realm and say like, and it ties in with this whole call your senator thing. Like, there's no point asking banks, central banks, not to print loads of money. You just invent Bitcoin and you become a Bitcoiner and you stop interacting with that system. So when people get furious about people kicking Donald Trump off all social media, Alex Jones, whatever, these people get deplatformed. Stop complaining, stop fighting about it. In fact, it helps us with the self-sovereign movement if you encourage Facebook and Twitter to be as ridiculous with the censorship as possible, because that motivates everyone to adopt the other platforms. Just like Bitcoin would be screwed if the American dollar decided to become deflationary. And
You really like picking fights, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
You like
You know what?
punching
You know,
people.
What?
Thanks, guys, it's time to go. But
All right.
it's going all day, and John Swann, you gotta come with me, because he's going to horsepower range, and I promised him a ride. You can get up to your brother, we're heading out right now, and, go in the way.
Go, man. Come on stage. Let's celebrate the end of this conference. It was this was an amazing conference.
Give it up for Audio Go.